When Tulsi Gabbard sat across from Barack Obama in a tense congressional hearing and read 7 redacted words from a declassified CIA document, the myth of a scandal-free presidency vanished in an instant. Do not shut down any investigative leads. 7 words, handwritten in the margin of a CIA briefing note, dated the 28th of July, 2016. The handwriting was not the CIA director's. It was a summary of the president's verbal response, recorded by John Brennan during the briefing, and annotated in the margin of his own notes. Barack Obama's response, the response that had been redacted from every declassified version for 8 years, classified, sealed, withheld from Congress, withheld from the public, withheld from the FISA court, until Tulsi Gabbard, the combat veteran whose government had put her on an extremist watch list for speaking on television, read it out loud in a congressional hearing room with the 44th President of the United States sitting 12 feet away. Obama's face didn't change. His hands didn't move. He sat in his gallery chair the way he had sat through 1,000 events, composed, measured, presidential, even in civilian clothes. But something behind his eyes, something that had been performing composure for 30 years, something that had powered a career built on the belief that eloquence could outrun evidence, went dark. What happened next would end the myth of the scandal-free presidency. And it started 6 hours earlier, when Barack Obama walked into a hearing room he thought he controlled. Before we get into what happened, if this is the kind of content you want to see, subscribe now. We're just getting started. The hearing was titled, Oversight of the Intelligence Community's Domestic Surveillance Programs. It was a Wednesday morning in June, and the House Judiciary Committee hearing room in the Rayburn Building had been full since 7:00 a.m. 90 minutes before the first gavel, an hour before the witness arrived, and 2 hours before anyone outside the Democratic caucus leadership knew that the 44th President of the United States would be in the room. Barack Obama opened the main gallery door at 9:35 a.m., flanked by 2 Secret Service agents and a former senior aide who now worked at his foundation. He was wearing a charcoal gray suit, no tie. The no tie that had become his post-presidency uniform, the visual message that he was no longer bound by the office, but still carried its gravity. His hair was grayer than it had been during his presidency, but the walk was the same, unhurried, confident. The walk of a man who had entered 1,000 rooms and owned every one of them. The gallery recognized him immediately. A murmur. Not the surprised murmur of people who didn't expect him, but the reverential murmur of people who had been told he was coming and still weren't prepared for the physical reality of a former president walking through a door. Democratic members on the committee dais half stood. A junior representative from California actually put her hand over her heart, the involuntary gesture of someone encountering a figure they had only seen on screens. Obama moved through the gallery the way he always moved, touching arms, nodding, offering the half-smile that had won 2 presidential elections and a Nobel Prize. He sat in the VIP section, directly behind the witness table, center row, center seat, visible from every camera angle. His presence was the message. Democrats had invited him quietly through back channels, announced to the Republican minority only that morning, to serve as a living rebuke to the woman sitting at the witness table. The woman whose career as DNI was built on declassifying the secrets of the intelligence community that Obama had overseen. The woman who had been placed on a high-risk watch list by the surveillance system Obama had expanded. The woman who had left Obama's party, endorsed his political enemy, and was now running the 18 agencies that Obama considered his greatest institutional legacy. Tulsi Gabbard sat at the witness table. She had arrived at 8:15 a.m., alone, except for a staff aide who carried a single box of documents. Not thick, not impressive, just a standard file storage box that could have contained anything. She wore a dark navy suit. No jewelry, except a small American flag pin on her lapel. Her hair was pulled back. Her expression was the expression she had learned in Iraq. Not blank, not angry, not friendly. Present, the face of someone who is paying attention to everything and reacting to nothing. She had seen Obama enter. She did not stand. She did not turn. She watched his reflection in the polished surface of the witness table's water pitcher, the distorted image of a tall man in a gray suit, moving through a room that parted for him. And she waited. The chairman gave the hearing to order at 10:02 a.m. The surprise came 40 minutes into the hearing. A Democratic senator from Connecticut, one of the committee's most senior members, concluded his questioning of Gabbard about ODNI restructuring, and then, instead of yielding his remaining time back to the committee, turned to the chairman and said, "Mr. Chairman, I'd like to yield my remaining time to our guest, President Obama, for a brief statement." The hearing room shifted. On the Republican side of the dais, two members exchanged glances. The chairman, a Republican, yielding time to a gallery guest was unusual but procedurally permissible. There was no grounds to object that wouldn't look like silencing a former president. Obama rose from his gallery seat. The movement was fluid, the movement of an athlete, not a politician, the same kinetic ease that had made him the most physically graceful president since Kennedy. He walked to the committee microphone that had been set up in the gallery, not the witness table where Gabbard sat, but a standing microphone at the gallery rail. The positioning was deliberate. Obama stood above the witness table, looking down at Gabbard. "Thank you, Senator. I appreciate the courtesy." His voice filled the room the way it always had, resonant, measured, calibrated, the voice that had delivered the "Yes, we can" speech, and the eulogy at Emmanuel AME Church, and the announcement that Osama bin Laden was eliminated. Even out of office, even in a committee hearing room, even at a standing microphone meant for brief remarks, the voice commanded the room. "I want to address something directly, because I think the American people deserve honesty, not the selective declassification of documents designed to score political points." He looked down at Gabbard. Director Gabbard sits at that table today because of loyalty, not to the Constitution, but to one man. She was placed in this position not because she is qualified to lead 18 intelligence agencies, but because she endorsed the right candidate at the right time. The Democratic side of the dais was nodding. On the gallery benches, staffers were recording on their phones. The angles pre-planned. The moment pre-staged. Let's be clear about Director Gabbard's record. She met with Bashar al-Assad, an authoritarian leader who attacked his own people without State Department authorization. She praised Edward Snowden, a man who took classified information and fled to Russia. She was placed on a TSA watch list, not for political reasons, but because her travel patterns raised legitimate security concerns that any responsible screening system would flag. Obama's voice softened, not weaker, but warmer, the shift that his speechwriters called the pastoral register, the voice of a man who is about to say something he wishes he didn't have to say. And now she sits at the head of the intelligence community, declassifying documents not for transparency, but for revenge, not for the American people, but for an audience of one. He straightened. "I served as president for 8 years. I protected this country. I oversaw the operation that took down Osama bin Laden. And I did it with an intelligence community that I trusted, because I didn't use it as a weapon. I used it as a shield." He looked at Gabbard one final time. "Director Gabbard, with respect, you are not qualified for the chair you sit in, and the documents you waving around are not evidence of wrongdoing. They are evidence of a grudge." The Democratic side applauded. Several members stood. The gallery buzzed. Obama walked back to his seat with the same unhurried grace, touching an arm, nodding, the half-smile back in place. He sat down. He had given the performance of his life, and Tulsi Gabbard had not moved. The chairman looked at Gabbard. "Director Gabbard, you have the right of response." Gabbard leaned forward, adjusted her microphone. The adjustment produced a small click, the loudest sound in the room. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman." She did not look at Obama. She looked at the committee. "The former president just said several things about me. I'm not going to address the personal attacks. He's entitled to his opinion about my qualifications. What I am going to address are the facts. Because facts are what the intelligence community is supposed to deal in." She reached into the file box beside her chair and removed a document, a single document printed on government letterhead. "The former president said my placement on the TSA watch list was because my travel patterns raised legitimate security concerns. I'd like to read from the actual document." She held it up. "This is an internal DHS memorandum from the Quiet Skies program manager, dated the 24th of July 2024, requesting my expedited enrollment in the program. It was classified. I obtained it as DNI and have had it reviewed for declassification," she read. The justification field, the field that explains why a person is being placed on the watch list, reads as follows. Subject is a former member of Congress, former presidential candidate, and current political commentator who has made statements critical of the current administration on national television. Subject's travel patterns include frequent domestic flights to media appearances and political events. Gabbard set the document on the table. This memo does not mention radical extremism. It does not mention national security. It does not reference any threat assessment, any intelligence report, any law enforcement referral. The justification for placing a 1-year combat veteran on a high-risk watch list was that she criticized the administration on television. She paused. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. Not louder, not emotional, but personal in a way that the military register usually suppressed. "I enlisted in the Hawaii Army National Guard in 2003, Mr. President. 2 years after September 11th. I was 21 years old. I deployed to Iraq in 2004 with a medical unit attached to a field artillery brigade. I earned a combat medical badge. I treated soldiers who had been severely injured in combat, who had been burned, who were losing vital fluids faster than I could replace them. I went to Kuwait in 2008 as a military police officer. I have served this country in uniform for over 21 years, and the system you built, the domestic surveillance apparatus that expanded under your administration, the Quiet Skies program that was launched in 2010 under your DHS, the SSS screening protocols that your administration implemented. That system was used to put me on a high-risk watch list because I said something on Fox News that someone in the White House didn't like." She looked at the gallery, at Obama. "You just told this committee that my watch list placement was because my travel patterns raised legitimate security concerns." "Sir, I travel to give speeches. I travel to appear on television. I travel to visit my family in Hawaii. My husband Abraham, a cinematographer, not a national security threat, was also placed on the list. Air marshals, federal agents whose job is to protect commercial flights from actual dangerous actors, were pulled off high-risk international routes and reassigned to follow me on domestic flights from Nashville to Orlando. For 6 months, every time I walked through an airport, I was pulled aside. Every item in my bag was searched. Every inch of my body was patted down. 30 to 45 minutes, every flight, while the boarding pass in my hand was stamped with 4 letters, SSS, that marked me as a suspected threat, a woman who had deployed to Iraq to fight extremists was now classified as 1. Mr. President, this was done under your authority. Not you personally in 2024, but the system you built, the infrastructure you expanded, the tools you created and left for every administration after you to inherit and use. In the gallery, Obama sat with his hands on his knees, the classic Obama-seated pose, relaxed, open, presidential. But when Gabbard read the DHS memo statements critical of the current administration, his jaw shifted. Not a clench, a repositioning, the micro-movement of a man whose body has registered an impact before his mind has decided how to absorb it. He recrossed his legs, adjusted his jacket. Small movements, presidential movements, the movements of a man who has spent decades managing his physical presentation in public. But the sum of the movements was greater than any one of them. They were the movements of discomfort, and in a man as physically controlled as Barack Obama, discomfort was news. Gabbard placed the DHS memo in a separate stack, the beginning of an evidence pile that would grow throughout the morning. She removed a second document from the box. This one was thicker, several pages printed in color, with what appeared to be 2 parallel timelines arranged side by side. Document 2, she said. This was prepared by the ODNI Directors Initiatives Group at my request. It is a correlation analysis. She held it up so the committee and the cameras could see the 2-column layout. Dates on the left, dates on the right, with colored lines connecting entries across the columns. Column 1, dates of meetings between senior White House political staff and IRS leadership during the period 2010 to 2012. These dates come from White House visitor logs, which are public record. Column 2, dates on which new conservative organizations were added to the IRS's enhanced scrutiny list, the targeting list that the Treasury Inspector General documented in his 2013 report. These dates come from the IGS evidence files, which are now in ODNI custody. She ran her finger down the 2 columns. Between March 2010 and April 2012, there were 14 meetings between White House political staff and IRS leadership. Within 2 weeks of 11 of those 14 meetings, new organizations were added to the enhanced scrutiny list. She looked up. 11 of 14, Mr. President. Obama's right hand moved. The movement was small, his hand sliding from his knee to the armrest of his gallery chair, fingers curling around the wooden edge. He didn't know he was gripping it. The cameras knew. Now, I'm a DNI, not a prosecutor, Gabbard continued. Correlation is not causation. I understand that. But I can tell you, as someone whose professional life involves analyzing patterns in intelligence data, that an 11 of 14 correlation between White House meetings and IRS targeting actions would trigger a full counterintelligence investigation if it involved any foreign government on Earth. She set the timeline down. You told Bill O'Reilly in 2014 that there was not even a smidgen of corruption at the IRS, Mr. President. 11 of 14 meetings correlate with new targeting actions. That's not a smidgen. That is a pattern. She paused, and then, for the first and only time in the hearing, something resembling a smile crossed her face. Not warm, not amused, but the grim half-smile of a soldier who is about to deploy a piece of military wisdom in the army. We have a saying. Once is an accident. Twice is a coincidence. 3 times is enemy action. She looked at Obama. You had 11. Document 3. Gabbard removed another set of pages. This one was sparser. A single authorization form, dense with bureaucratic language, bearing the seal of the Department of Justice. This is the DOJ authorization to seize the telephone records of the Associated Press. Executed May 2012. It covered 20 phone lines home, cell, and work, used by over 100 AP reporters and editors. The seizure was conducted without notice, without negotiation, and without the courtesy that the DOJ's own internal guidelines required. She turned to a specific section. This document was classified for national security reasons. Ivy had it reviewed and partially declassified. Most of it is bureaucratic approval chains, routing numbers, the administrative machinery of surveillance. But there is one detail that has never been reported. She pointed to a specific area on the page. In the margin of this authorization, handwritten, not typed, someone wrote 6 words. She read them per WH. Counsel proceed without standard media notification. Approved at highest level. The hearing room went silent, not the attentive silence of people listening. The shocked silence of people who have heard something they need a moment to process. Approved at highest level, Gabbard repeated. That is a handwritten annotation on a document authorizing the surveillance of over 100 American journalists. She looked at the committee. Mr. Chairman, I want to ask a question, not a rhetorical question, a genuine one. Who is the highest level above the Attorney General of the United States? She let the question hang. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. No one answered, because everyone in the room knew the answer, and no one wanted to say it out loud. And this wasn't the only case. Gabbard continued. James Rosen of Fox News. The DOJ tracked his movements, obtained his personal emails, and named him an unlawful collaborator in a court filing. Not a suspect, not a person of interest, an unlawful collaborator. A reporter for talking to a source. The former president's administration prosecuted 8 people under the Espionage Act for communicating with journalists, 8 more than every previous president combined. George Washington through George W. Bush combined prosecuted fewer people under the Espionage Act for talking to reporters than Barack Obama did. She paused, set down the authorization, picked up a separate sheet, a list. I want to name them, Mr. Chairman, because numbers erase people, and I don't want these people erased. Thomas Drake, NSA senior executive who reported waste and mismanagement to Congress. Charges eventually dropped to a misdemeanor. Career destroyed. Shammai Leibowitz, FBI translator who disclosed information about surveillance of a foreign embassy, sentenced to 20 months. Stephen Kim, State Department contractor who discussed a classified report about North Korea with a Fox News reporter, sentenced to 13 months. Chelsea Manning, Army intelligence analyst, sentenced to 35 years. 35 years, Mr. Chairman, for providing information to a journalist. John Kiriakou, CIA officer who confirmed the existence of extreme interrogation techniques to a reporter, sentenced to 20 months. The only person connected to the CIA's harsh interrogation program who went to prison, not for conducting those acts, but for telling a reporter that those acts happened. Jeffrey Sterling, Donald Sackleben, Edward Snowden, charged in absentia, fled to Russia. 8 people, most of them career civil servants. Most of them believed they were doing the right thing. All of them prosecuted under a 1917 law that was written to catch German saboteurs and had been used 3 times in 90 years before the Obama administration discovered it was the perfect tool for silencing people who talked to reporters. She turned toward the gallery. Mr. President, you said 5 minutes ago that you use the intelligence community as a shield, not a weapon. You used the Department of Justice to surveil 100 journalists, track the movements of a Fox News reporter, name that reporter an unlawful collaborator in a federal court filing, and prosecute 8 Americans for the crime of telling reporters things the government didn't want reported, using a World War I espionage law that was never intended for this purpose. John Kiriakou went to prison for confirming that the CIA used simulated drowning. The people who actually conducted the simulated drowning were never charged. Not one. The interrogators walked free. The lawyers who wrote the legal memos authorizing the harsh measures walked free. The officials who approved the program walked free. The only person connected to the entire CIA enhanced interrogation program who went to prison was the man who told a reporter it happened. Mr. President, the instigator went free. And the man who said extreme measures happened went to prison under your administration, with your Attorney General in your Department of Justice. What would you call that? Obama leaned forward. The movement looked presidential, engaged, thoughtful, the posture of a man considering a serious question. But in body language, leaning forward in response to an accusation is not engagement. It is defense. His elbows were on his knees now. His fingers were interlaced. The famous thinking pose that photographers had captured 1,000 times in the Situation Room and the Oval Office. But the muscles in his forearms were tight, the tendons visible beneath the skin. He wasn't thinking. He was holding himself together. His former aide leaned toward him, whispered something. Obama nodded. The automatic nod. The nod that means, "I heard you, but not I agree." He did not whisper back. Document 4. The words changed the room, not because of what Gabbard said, but because of what she removed from the box. A single page. Not a report, not a timeline, not an authorization form. A photocopy of a handwritten document. The kind of photocopy that preserves every pen stroke, every margin note, every coffee stain. These are CIA Director John Brennan's handwritten notes from his intelligence briefing to you, Mr. President, on the 28th of July, 2016. Obama straightened in his chair. The movement was sharp, sharper than any previous adjustment. The movement of a man who has heard the name of a document he knows, and did not expect to hear it in public. A portion of these notes has been previously declassified. The American people already know that Brennan briefed you on what he described as Hillary Clinton's approval of a plan to vilify Donald Trump by stirring up a scandal, claiming interference by Russian security services. That portion was declassified years ago. Gabbard held up the photocopy. What has not been declassified until today is your response. She read slowly, word by word. Brennan's notes record your response as follows. POTUS asked, "How confident?" I said, "Low confidence." Source is partisan. Chain is indirect. POTUS said, "Proceed with caution, but do not shut down any investigative leads." She set the page on the table. Do not shut down any investigative leads. That is the sentence that has been redacted from every version of this document released to Congress, to the public, and to the courts for 8 years. Your administration classified it. The next administration kept it classified. It took my office, the office of a DNI you just called unqualified, to declassify it. Gabbard's voice was steady. The military register. Flat, precise, report mode. But beneath the steadiness was something harder, something colder, something that the hearing room could feel, the way a room can feel the temperature drop before a window breaks. Let me explain what this means, Mr. Chairman. In July 2016, the CIA director briefed the president that the Clinton campaign was manufacturing a political scandal, fabricating a narrative of Russian collusion to vilify a political opponent. Brennan told the president that the intelligence behind this assessment was low confidence, partisan source, indirect chain. The president's response was not inform the Trump campaign. It was not alert the FISA court that any warrant applications based on this material may be politically motivated. It was not shut this down before our intelligence agencies become tools of one political campaign against another. The president's response was, Do not shut down any investigative leads. She looked at Obama. 3 months later, the FBI obtained a FISA warrant on Carter Page based on the Steele dossier. The dossier that Brennan had just told you was funded by the Clinton campaign. 4 months later, the FBI used a national security briefing of the Trump campaign to gather intelligence for Crossfire Hurricane, an operation you now knew was rooted in a political maneuver. And within the first 126 days of the next administration, 125 classified intelligence items were leaked to the press, compared to 8 or 9 under your entire 8 years. You didn't pull every trigger, Mr. President. But you built the tool, you loaded it, you pointed it at a political opponent. And when your CIA director asked you what to do, you said, "Do not shut down." That's not a shield, Mr. President. That's a weapon. And you aimed it. Obama's left eyebrow moved, a fraction of an inch. The micro-expression of a man who has heard something he didn't expect to hear, read aloud. It was the only visible crack. The rest of his face held. The composure held. The posture held. But the eyebrow told the story that the rest of his body refused to tell. The story of a man who had assumed that sentence would stay redacted forever and had just heard it read on live television. His former aide passed a note. Obama read it. His jaw tightened, the masseter muscles flexing visibly beneath the skin. The same micro-movement from document 1, but stronger now, more deliberate. The movement of a man who is clenching his teeth to keep them closed. He folded the note and put it in his jacket pocket. He did not write back. There was nothing to write. The sentence was in the room now, and no note could take it out. Final document. Mr. President. Gabbard reached into the box one last time. What she removed was not a classified file, not a government memo, not a handwritten note. It was a printed sheet of paper, a printout from a word processor, single-spaced, with quotation marks visible from across the room. This one isn't classified. It's not from a sealed archive or a redacted file. It's from your own mouth. She read, the 29th of March 2007, campaign speech, Washington, D.C. You said, "When I am president, we will have a government that is open and transparent. We will strengthen whistleblower laws to protect federal workers who expose waste, fraud, and abuse of authority." She looked up. You prosecuted 8 whistleblowers under the Espionage Act, more than every president before you combined. She returned to the page. The 2nd of October, 2008. Presidential debate. You said, "We only have one president at a time. We should never use the instruments of government power against our political opponents." Your CIA director briefed you that the Clinton campaign was manufacturing a scandal against your political opponent's successor. Your response was, "Do not shut down any investigative leads." She turned the page. May 2018, speech at Rice University. You said, and the audience laughed, "I didn't have scandals," which seems like it shouldn't be something you brag about. Gabbard set the page down. They laughed, Mr. President, because they believed you, because you delivered it with enough charm and enough timing and enough of that smile that people decided believing you was easier than reading the documents. You've read the documents, Mr. President. All of them. Every file, every memo, every authorization, every margin note. And I can tell you, from the Quiet Skies memo that put me on a high-risk watch list for speaking on television, to the IRS timeline that shows 11 meetings correlating with 11 targeting actions, to the DOJ authorization that says approved at highest level, to Brennan's notes that record you saying, "Do not shut down any investigative leads about an investigation you knew was based on a political maneuver." She paused. Let the list settle. You had scandals, Mr. President. You had plenty of them. You just had the eloquence to make people forget. The hearing room was still, not the silence that follows an explosion, the silence that follows a diagnosis, the silence of people who have just been told something they suspected but had never heard, stated plainly by someone with the authority and the evidence to state it. Obama looked at his hands. Not at Gabbard, not at the committee, not at the cameras. At his own hands, folded in his lap, fingers interlaced. The same position he'd held since Document 3. The man who had made eye contact with every audience, every camera, every interviewer, every opponent, every foreign leader, for 30 years. The man whose gaze was so steady and so warm that it became the visual signature of an era, looked at his own hands the way a man looks at a tool he no longer knows how to use. His former aide touched his arm. Obama didn't respond. He was somewhere behind the mask, behind the eloquence, behind the charisma, behind 3 decades of I don't have scandals, in the place where a man goes when the things he said are played back beside the things he did, and the distance between them is measured in classified documents and handwritten notes, and the careers of 8 people who went to prison for talking to journalists. Gabbard turned back to the committee. Mr. Chairman, the former president called me unqualified. He said I was placed in this chair because of loyalty to one man. He questioned my fitness to lead the intelligence community. I'd like to tell the committee why I am in this chair. Her voice was different now. Not the military register. Something older. Something more personal. The voice of a woman who had been carrying a story for 20 years and was about to set it down. I enlisted in the Hawaii Army National Guard in 2003, 2 years after September 11th. I was 21. I watched the towers fall on television in my dorm room, and I walked into a recruiting office 3 weeks later, because I genuinely believed, that when your country is attacked, you serve. I deployed to Iraq in 2004 with a medical unit. I earned a combat medical badge. I treated soldiers who were fading fast boys, most of them 18 and 19 years old, losing their life force in the dirt. I went to Kuwait in 2008 as a military police officer. I served in Congress for 8 years. I served on the Armed Services Committee and the Foreign Affairs Committee. I resigned as DNC Vice Chair in 2016 because I believed the primary process was corrupt, and the subsequent investigations proved I was right. I left the Democratic Party in 2022 because I believed it had been captured by forces that valued power over principle. And in 2024, the government I had served for 21 years, the government I had deployed to a combat zone to defend, put me on an extremist watch list for speaking on television. She stood, not dramatically, functionally, the way a soldier stands when making a report. Straight back, shoulders square, chin level. The former president built the system that did that. He expanded the surveillance state. He weaponized the IRS against political opponents. He used the Department of Justice to spy on journalists. He prosecuted whistleblowers. He knew the Clinton campaign was manufacturing a political scandal and told the CIA director, "Do not shut down." And when it was over, when the IRS commissioner had resigned, when the journalists' phone records had been seized, when 8 people had gone to prison, when a FISA warrant had been obtained under false pretenses, when a sitting president had been subjected to a 2-year investigation based on fabricated intelligence, he stood in front of an audience and said, "I didn't have scandals." And they laughed. Gabbard looked at Obama directly. The look of a soldier facing a commanding officer. Not hostile, not pleading, not deferential. Level. The look that says, "I see you." Clearly. "I took an oath, Mr. President, the same oath every soldier takes, every member of Congress takes, every president takes, to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I kept my oath, Mr. President. Pause. 2 seconds. 3 seconds. Did you keep yours? The hearing room was silent. Obama did not answer. He was not required to. He was a gallery guest, not a witness. But the question filled the room the way smoke fills a building after a fire. Not all at once, but gradually, curling into corners, settling into spaces, until the air itself felt different, and the only rational response was to decide whether to stay or leave. Obama stayed. He was too disciplined to leave, too experienced, too aware that standing up and walking out would be the clip, the only clip, the clip that would define the hearing, the clip that would replace "yes, we can" in the cultural memory. He sat in his chair. He kept his hands folded. He kept his face as neutral as a face can be when its owner has just heard 7 words that he classified 8 years ago. Read aloud on live television, followed by a question he cannot answer, because every possible answer makes the next day worse. He sat. He stayed. He endured. But the charisma was gone. The thing that Barack Obama had in every room for 30 years, the invisible force that made people stand when he entered, that made cameras turn toward him, that made audiences lean forward and reporters soften their questions. It was gone. What sat in the gallery chair was not the 44th President of the United States. It was a man in a gray suit with his hands folded and his eyes on the middle distance, waiting for the hearing to end so he could stand and walk through a door. When the hearing broke for lunch 3 hours later, he stood. He walked through the gallery, not toward the main door, the door where the cameras waited, where the reporters had gathered, where the microphones were lined up for posturing statements. He walked toward the side door, the staff door, the door without a nameplate, the door that led to a service corridor, the door that members and visitors used only when they did not want to be seen leaving. His Secret Service detail adjusted, a quick pivot. The fluid adaptation of professionals who had protected this man for 16 years and understood without being told that the route had changed. They followed him through the side door. The door closed behind them with the soft institutional click of a government door doing its job. A single pool camera, positioned at the rear of the hearing room for wide-angle shots, caught the moment. Obama's back, the gray suit, the side door, the Secret Service detail, and then nothing. Just the closed door and the empty gallery seat, and the hearing room that continued to operate as though the most powerful man who had ever sat in it had not just left through the exit meant for people who carry things. The clip of Gabbard reading Brennan S. notes, "Do not shut down any investigative leads," was posted at 1:17 p.m. Eastern and had been viewed 9 million times by 3:00 p.m. But it was not the most shared clip. The most shared clip was the side door. 12 seconds of footage. Obama standing, walking, not toward the main exit, toward the side. The Secret Service adjusting, the door opening, the gray suit disappearing into a corridor, the door closing. No words, no confrontation, no dramatic moment. Just a man choosing a door. And the door he chose telling the story that his composure never would. Did you keep yours? Trended #1 within 30 minutes? And stayed there for 18 hours. It was printed on T-shirts by evening. It was projected onto the side of a building in Nashville by midnight. A veteran in San Diego had it tattooed on his forearm by the following afternoon. Obama's post-hearing statement came from a spokesperson at 4:30 p.m. The former president's record speaks for itself. He will not dignify political theater with a response. The statement did not address Brennan's notes. It did not deny, "Do not shut down." It did not address the IRS correlation. It did not address the approved at highest level margin note. It did not address the Quiet Skies memo. Within 48 hours, The House Judiciary Committee voted to formally refer the 11 of 14 IRS correlation timeline to the Department of Justice for investigation. The DOJ's Public Integrity Section opened a preliminary review of the AP phone records authorization, with specific focus on the handwritten margin note. 3 former Obama administration officials, unnamed in press reports, contacted Judiciary Committee staff independently to request proffer sessions, the legal term for preliminary cooperation negotiations that occur when individuals anticipate potential exposure. By the end of the first week, Obama canceled a scheduled keynote at a DNC fundraiser. A source close to the family told The Washington Post he was consulting with counsel. Eric Holder, who had served as Attorney General during the AP and Rosen surveillance operations and who had signed both authorizations, retained new defense counsel, separate from his existing legal team. John Brennan, whose handwritten notes had detonated the hearing, issued a statement through his attorney. Director Brennan's briefing notes are accurate records of intelligence briefings conducted in accordance with established protocols. The statement did not address the content of Obama's response. It did not deny "do not shut down." Legal analysts noted that the phrasing, confirming the notes were accurate records, was in effect authentication. Brennan's own attorney had just confirmed that the 7 words Gabbard read were real. The Quiet Skies memo produced its own cascade. The DHS Inspector General announced an investigation into the criteria and authorization chain for Gabbard's enrollment in the program. 3 federal air marshal whistleblowers, the same whistleblowers who had first disclosed Gabbard's watch list status in 2024, were called to testify before the Senate Homeland Security Committee. Their testimony, delivered in closed session, reportedly described a program in which the enrollment criteria had been steadily expanded since its creation in 2010, to include categories criticism of government policy, association with political opposition figures that had nothing to do with security threats and everything to do with politics. By the end of the second week, a federal grand jury had been convened in the District of Columbia. The scope, according to court records, covered abuse of federal surveillance authorities for political purposes during the period 2010 to 2017. The Obama Foundation announced a pause on new programming, pending organizational review. Michelle Obama canceled 3 scheduled book tour appearances. No explanation was provided. The side door clip continued to circulate, not because it was dramatic, but because it was the opposite of dramatic. It was the most ordinary 12 seconds of footage in the world. A man standing up, choosing a door, walking through it. And yet, it said everything that Obama's composure refused to say. A veteran posted a side-by-side video Obama entering through the main door at 9:35 a.m., smiling, shaking hands, touching arms, and Obama leaving through the side door at 1:15 p.m., alone, straight ahead, no eye contact. The video had no narration, no music, no commentary, just the 2 doors. It was viewed 22 million times in 48 hours. Gabbard, for her part, remained at the witness table for another 4 hours after Obama left. She answered every question the committee asked about ODNI restructuring, about budget allocation, about the Director's Initiatives Group, about the declassification process. She was methodical, precise, and unhurried. When a Democratic member accused her of using this hearing as a platform for political vengeance, Gabbard adjusted her microphone and said, "Congressman, I read 5 documents. 4 of them were produced by the government of the United States, by the DHS, the IRS Inspector General, the Department of Justice, and the CIA. The 5th was a printout of the former president's own speeches. I didn't write any of them. I didn't fabricate any of them. I found them, I declassified them, and I read them. If reading the government's own records into the congressional record is vengeance, then the vengeance was committed by the people who created the records, not by the woman who read them. At the Carl R. Darnell Army Medical Center in Fort Campbell, Kentucky, the base where the 101st Airborne Division comes home, Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb sat in a plastic chair behind a government-issued desk in a room marked Behavioral Health Walk-In Hours 0800 to 1600. The television on the wall was tuned to the hearing. Marcus had turned it on at 1000 because the VA waiting room TV was usually set to cable news anyway, and nobody complained. The three veterans who had shown up for their appointments sat in plastic chairs along the opposite wall. 2 men and a woman, all in civilian clothes, all wearing the expression that combat veterans wear in medical buildings, patient on the outside, vigilant underneath. Marcus had served in Iraq in 2004 to 2005. Different unit than Tulsi Gabbard. Same rotation. He had never met her in theater. Iraq was a big place, and medical units and MP units rarely crossed paths. But he knew her the way veterans know other veterans, by the language, by the posture, by the way she talked about service without performing it. When Gabbard read the Quiet Skies memo, statements critical of the current administration, Marcus looked at the waiting room. 3 chairs occupied, 12 empty. He knew why the chairs were empty. He knew because he heard it every week, in the hallways, in the parking lot, in the phone calls he made to the guys who scheduled appointments and then didn't show up. The same words, different mouths. I don't trust them. What if they put something in my file?